Welcome to Alumni Connections. I'm so excited to bring you Lishaun Francis today, class of 2003, A. Philip Randolph Campus High School. Stay tuned. We're going to get into a lot of stuff right after the Alumni Connections theme song. Bear with me as I hit some buttons here. And hopefully this brings back some memories for folks that have been sitting in the audience watching the May show.
No, Randolph is better than the rest. Even when you progress, you still gotta rep. A. Philip Randolph Campus High School. But this is not a test, you should say it with your chest. Be proud of your origin, and if you are proud, support it then. Stronger together through unity, better together, let's build the community. Randolph isn't a school or a building, it's a legacy. It's not in your past, it's your identity. So show some pride. Alumni Connections is sponsored and brought to you by SBI, CCPI, soundbusiness.org. Soundbusiness.org. The journey doesn't end with graduation and prom. The journey doesn't end with graduation and prom. The journey doesn't end with the journey doesn't end. This is the Alumni Connections Project. This is the Alumni Connections Project. A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph. Randolph.
So hopefully that Randolph got you going. So I want to introduce everybody to Lishaun Francis, Spelman College alumni class. Oh, I think that's, pardon me. Sorry, technical difficulties. Here we go. All right, Lishaun Francis, APRCHS, class year 2003, Spelman College, class of 2007, graduated Magna cum laude, University of Michigan, Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy, master's degree in public policy, alumni class of 2009. She's currently the associate director in health collaborations. As part of the health team, Lishaun supports Children's Now's mental health trauma efforts. Prior to joining Children Now, Lishaun Francis was an associate director at the California Medical Association. She provided policy support and analysis for California physicians on the issues of Medi-Cal, workers' compensation, and health information technology. Lishaun spent over 2 years with the Legislative Analyst Office, LAO, where she provided fiscal and policy analysis to the state legislature on issues of mental health, developmental disabilities, and alcohol and drug programs. In Washington, D.C., Lishaun Francis worked as Program Analyst for the U.S. Department of Education, providing fiscal support on issues of higher education. Lishaun Francis received her Master's of Public Policy from the University of Michigan and a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. Lishaun, thank you for doing this. Thank you for being on the show.
That's quite a mouthful. How are you?
Try that here. Now switch this. Are you there, Lishaun?
I'm here.
Oh, I can hear you now. All right. So my headphones aren't working for me. So tell us where you are. Thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate you. You have an amazing resume. Talk to us about what you're doing right now.
Oh, no problem. So I am actually in the Bay Area in California, Northern California. Our offices are located in Oakland, but we do statewide policy and advocacy work. So, you know, I moved out to California about 10 years ago now. So this is home for now.
That's awesome. And talk to us about, you know, obviously, I'm assuming you grew up in New York City. We're going to get into that story, but just why the move to Oakland. I'm assuming that had to do, you know, maybe we'll come back to this, but I'm just, I know I got a lot of New Yorkers watching these kind of things, so interested on the move to Oakland. So I'll take a little preview of that, and then we'll get into the high school story here.
Yeah, so I actually just moved where the opportunity was. To be honest, after graduate school, you know, I had a job in Washington, D.C., which is much closer to home. But I did want to do some state policy and level work, and I got a really good offer for California. I'd spent some time out here prior and really just enjoyed the vibe. So when I first moved out here, I actually moved to Sacramento and spent a good amount of time in Sacramento at first. So I think it's a great place to be to do the kind of work that I'm doing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've been in Sacramento. I've been in the Bay Area. I much prefer the Bay Area, I got to say. So,
everyone does.
So talk to me about where were you in junior high? Where did you go to junior high? And how did A. Philip Randolph Campus High School get on your radar?
I'll be honest, I don't remember the specifics because it was so long ago. But I went to a school that was actually K through 8, PSIS 217, which is located on Roosevelt Island, which many folks might be familiar with today. But back then, it was the land to nowhere, and it was not as popular or as nice as it is today. And I just remember receiving the book. And depending on how old you are, the book was every high school in New York City in the 5 boroughs, with a description, the address, the kinds of programs they had available, the kind of clubs they had available. And you applied by putting in, I think, your top 10 options for schools. And A. Philip Randolph interested me because of its humanities program and track. And I was really into English and history. And that was my first choice.
And where was this? Where were you saying this bridge would know where it was? What borough were you in?
I was in the city. I was in Manhattan. So if you're familiar with Roosevelt Island, it sits squarely between Queensbridge and Lower East Side. So if you look at the train map, the F train goes there, and it is 63rd Street, Lexington, Roosevelt Island, 21st Street, Queensbridge. That's the direction.
I got confused because it's one of the few places. Now, I grew up between Southern California and NYC, and I think I've been in, worked in, lived in just about every part of the island of Manhattan, and I have not been on Roosevelt Island.
You go there, it is, I actually was really upset when I went back to visit when I was at Spelman, because it is so nice now. I knew it was changing when I saw the Starbucks, but growing up there, you just felt really close to Queensbridge, honestly, because you could walk to Queensbridge. But most people didn't know about it. So, a lot of kids growing up would actually say they were from Queensbridge because we were so close to there. But really,
you're like, I'm just gonna rep Queensbridge because that makes no sense.
Right, but the reality is, it's just like this island right off, and it has a really interesting and cool history. It used to actually be where we put lepers, unfortunately, like way back in the day. So it had 2 hospitals when I was growing up, and it was for long-term care. That's kind of what it was known for.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's definitely what I kind of noticed about it, other than the fact that, because there's like the Sky cable
tram
that goes over. Yeah, I mean, that's, and I would see it all the time and always wonder. So now I gotta put it on the list because I gotta go. And like you said, it looks like it's developed well because you always see it driving by on the FDR and all that good stuff. All right, so you're in Roosevelt, you get the big book. Somehow Randolph gets on the radar and you end up going there. What was your first memory or things that you took away from entering the castle-like building of A. Philip Randolph Campus High School?
I thought it was huge. I was a little overwhelmed because I came from a smaller school where we all kind of knew each other. And I do remember just feeling really overwhelmed by the sheer number of kids in the building.
And did you quickly adjust, or was that something that was like?
I think it took me about a year.
Okay.
It took me about a year to adjust and to find my people. And what I mean by that is, really find the nerdy kids, and we hung out together. And it takes a while to find your group, whichever group you might fall in. And I fell like squarely into the nerdy kids group. And unfortunately, it's not like there's a list where you can just go, hey, who else is really into the things that I'm into and wants to hang out. So it just took a while, I think, for me.
What were you into coming into 9th grade?
I read a lot. Even to this day, I read a lot. I spent copious amounts of time reading. And so I was really into books. And so I was not the kid who felt annoyed at the English teacher assigning a book. I was really excited about it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I read a lot, I wrote a lot, and so I was just kind of really into those kinds of things, and I hung out with people who were like-minded.
Well, I love doing these interviews because I think very much like your experience of, coming into the building, and obviously it's difficult to know, where the people are that like what you like. It's really, I think, affirming, and I know one of this, this is our takeaway, but just knowing like, you don't have to be a certain way to fit in. You don't have to have anxiety around having, all of it figured out, right? So just being comfortable. And so I know there's somebody that's going to watch this video at some point down the line that's going to say, if it's not today, it's going to be on another day where they say, that's me. That's what I did. It's good to know another person. So I love to hear that story. So it took you a little while to kind of get your feet grounded and find your tribe, so to speak. So talk to me about the things that you remember and that stood out from your experience during freshman and sophomore year.
God, it was so long ago, Cameron. I'm really struggling here to figure out specifics. I remember starting a journalism club. I can't remember if that was my junior or senior year. There was none at the time. This is when I thought I wanted to be a journalist.
Amazing.
Huh?
I said, that's amazing.
Yeah, I remember starting that with like a couple friends and a teacher who was interested in advising us. I just, I didn't have a ton of extracurricular activities outside of SBI. So a lot of my time was spent like writing and trying to be a journalist at the time. That was kind of my dream.
That's amazing that you kind of had that that wish and that desire. How did you get exposed to SBI?
So I don't quite remember how I got exposed to SBI. I don't remember if a friend of mine
That's usually the way. That's usually somebody told me
somebody might have told me about it. I do remember being more exposed to SBI once I started thinking about college, junior year. And they had a college preparatory kind of track and arrangement. I was very clear that I was going to college and that college was going to be the next step for me. And so I was definitely one of those kids that was showing up to talk to counselors, Mr. Thompson, anyone who would talk to me about colleges, the application process, the SAT process, the funding process very early.
So talk to us about it, because I know we talked, that was like the major point we talked on before we got on. So what were you feeling as you were starting that process? You're getting into junior and senior year. Obviously, you're dealing with classes. I heard you when you were saying you're on the nerdy side, so you're focused on getting good grades, which is amazing. You were doing this journalism stuff. So what was the pressure and feeling you were having around this whole preparation for the end of high school?
I had a lot of anxiety and concern around the SATs because, like many of us, I did not test that well on standardized tests. So I do remember really just being concerned about it. And I think I ended up taking the SATs twice because of that fact. And I just remember reading everything I could get my hands on about how to prepare for the SATs and how it really wasn't just about how smart you were, quote unquote. But really there was a thing about testing strategies and really spending a lot of time, my second time around, thinking about and learning about testing strategies. So I do remember a lot of anxiety about that. I do remember being like oddly optimistic about, getting into college and going to some colleges. I think I applied to about 12 schools. And knowing what I know now, I was entirely too optimistic about my chances to get into certain schools and programs. But I think it was a great exercise, and I'm happy that I went through the process that I went through.
So talk to me about that. Because these are things that we talk about and recommend. I was really deeply involved. I started in 1996 with Thompson, but I was in high school, my last year of high school at that point. So, in terms of memory, I feel you on the not remembering it all so well thing. But I was really into it for different reasons at that time. I was calling up record labels and getting swag because at that time, in 1996, we were teaching kids the business of the music industry and sort of applying those career traits to that. And the program evolved into more performing artists with the academic program, still around the college and career trajectory, but the strategy definitely changed. And so in 2010, we did this CASI program with the juniors. So we started to do SAT prep, and all the things that you're talking about, it's more about the strategies than a lot of the knowledge, because there's not a lot you can study for and cram in just a few months. So it's more about the strategy of taking the test and getting people on the par of what other students in more affluent neighborhoods and schools are getting in terms of tutors and that sort of thing. And then the whole idea of, yes, you need to apply to many schools because your chances of getting, not only getting in, but getting a package that's really going to fit what you need, it's hard, it's difficult. So you want to have the options there and you want to have the leverage there. So I love that you did all that. You're really on top of it. So talk to us about the decisions that you were making. Why did you end up at Spelman? It's awesome, by the way. Congratulations for all of it. We're going to talk about not only undergrad but graduate school 2 times over, right? So just an amazing educational experience. Lots of degrees on the wall, lots of opportunities that are out there for you. So let's talk about what made you decide on Spelman.
Yeah, so I'll say this just kind of to your last comment as well. I did not truly understand or have an appreciation for what other kids in other, cities or other states were getting in terms of college prep, right? So everything that you talked about, I think many of us were really ignorant about just how much more preparation other kids had and support to get into college. And once I got my acceptance letters from schools, and I can't remember every place that I applied and got acceptance letters to, I did visit some of them, and I went down and visited Spelman. And visiting Spelman was what made me say, this is the place for me. And I do remember the president at the time of Spelman College saying, there is no other college or university in the world that was created for you with you in mind. And she's right. There is no other college that was created with the Black woman in mind besides Spelman College. So that really was a transformative moment for me. I really felt at home, and I really felt like that was a place that I could thrive.
When you were saying that, I was getting kind of goosebumps because I think that's extremely powerful. So, Kelly, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I want you to continue on that. I think that's something that, for somebody that doesn't have that proper understanding, and also just going back to what you said, I think even if somebody had told you in high school, which somebody probably mentioned it, whether it was Thompson or admission counselor or something, feeling it and experiencing it is a whole nother ball of wax of understanding that, other kids are coming to this with a little bit more preparation and understanding and certainly, courses that they've taken at these, crazy specialized high schools and whatnot all over the country.
No, and you're absolutely right, Cameron. I mean, I think part of it too is I realized that more when I got to Spelman, because I was going to school with some of the students who had that support and had that, educational background. So it was all very interesting to kind of see the difference and see the disparity, in our options and our next steps. But, for me, Spelman wound up being a really great choice.
That's awesome. And so talk to us why that ended up being a good choice. Why did you make the decision first at Randolph? I don't know what other schools that you applied to and got into, but what do you remember what captivated you about Spelman and made you decide on Spelman?
No, I think I was just doing my research and someone had recommended historically Black colleges. And so I applied to a few historically Black colleges and I didn't have a preference. I mean, I think originally I thought I was going to stay close to home. so I could get home, within 4 hours and make sure I saw my mom and my parents, etc. So I never really thought deeply in the application process about what it meant to move or how far away I was going to go. I just applied to the schools that interested me. And I applied to the majors that interested me. So that was kind of how I made my decision. It was very almost academic. Like I was just doing a lot of research and maybe talking to people that I was introduced to who went to Howard or who went to Hampton or whatever the case is. And that's how I made my decision to even apply. But I didn't have any personal investment in going to any of those schools until I started visiting.
Right. Okay. And then when you visited, what was the takeaway there?
Yeah, kind of what I said before about, what, the president kind of highlighted for us.
So you got that before you made your decision? I
got that before. Yeah. So Spelman hosts a weekend called A Day in the Life at Spelman College, and they invite accepted students to campus to spend a weekend with current students and stay in the dorms, et cetera. And it is the best recruitment that you could ever have, because you really do get to feel like you could see yourself there. And no other school had really offered that. Every other school was just like, you can come visit and tour our campus and talk to people. But I spent the night on campus before I actually accepted my admissions.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So you decided on Spelman. Tell us what senior, graduation into that summer was, and your first semester on campus at Spelman.
Yeah, I mean, it's all a blur, graduation, and I just couldn't wait to be out and be gone and move and be an adult and live on my own.
And tell me about the parents. Yeah, I don't know what was going on at home, siblings and all that. So kind of give us a little family background. What was going on? I know Spelman's probably a little bit further away than some of the New York colleges and whatnot. So talk to us about what the family was feeling about that.
Yeah, no, like my mom definitely was not happy. She wanted me closer to home. My brother had actually gone away to college in Baltimore. My sister had stayed in New York City for college. So I think in her mind, she thought the furthest I would go was the DMV area. But I don't think she had a really good understanding of exactly how far Atlanta was until we were flying out there. So I did the application process and the college application process, primarily by myself. It wasn't like I had a ton of parental advisement on it, because my parents don't have necessarily a background in kind of, American institutions. And what the best thing,
like most parents.
Yeah, like most parents. So I was really just talking to advisors. I was talking to my brother. I was talking to Mr. Thompson, and that's
awesome. All right, so you're at Spelman. Tell us about that first. You're on campus. You're living there now. What was that like?
Culture shock.
Culture shock.
Complete culture shock. You're moving from New York City, where even if you live in an odd place like Roosevelt Island, it is still a city that never sleeps. It is still a place you can get pizza at 2:00 in the morning. It is still a place where you've been riding public transportation since the time you were probably 10 or 11. That's not the South. And it's not even, Atlanta today is very different from the Atlanta that I, moved to in 2003, in terms of just how much bigger it's become in its population. So culture shock, it's also the South. It's very Southern. It's in Georgia. I tell people all the time that Atlanta is in Georgia, and to remember that. So, really culture shock, and culture shock on campus as well as off campus. For me, this was my first time being exposed to a range of socioeconomic status among Black people. I had never had that before. And many of us who grew up in New York City, never saw that before, where we are not exposed to a bunch of people who come from upper middle class families who look like us. So that was really shocking to me as well. But honestly, it's much more representative of the true Black experience in America.
Alicia Taylor, who I interviewed I think last week or the week before, she was talking about, coming from the Bronx where she was living, getting to Randolph, and then, she was exposed to like this diaspora at Randolph because there is a different range or grouping of Black and Latin folks at Randolph, and then going to Spelman and being introduced to a whole new diaspora there. So, very much on those same lines of what you were talking about. But she also talked about very much towards what maybe the director had sort of told you in that weekend, which was, she found herself at home with a community and a new respect for that community, just feeling like she belonged somewhere. Did you, even though you had the culture shock going on with Spelman, did you feel like you belonged?
I did. I mean, the first semester was a little weird, particularly because you're struggling not just with culture shock, but also what I call the academic readiness shock.
Yes.
And she's absolutely right. I think that if you are present and paying attention, and you are not simply spending all your time comparing Atlanta and comparing Spelman to what it doesn't have compared to New York, which a lot of us did, you realize very quickly that this is a place that you should buy into. This is a place that is interested in what you think. This is a place that is interested in developing your character, developing your intellect. In a very purposeful, in a very targeted, in a very kind way.
That's amazing. So talk to us about the progression. So we're, freshman year, what classes are you getting into? Are there any professors that are, sort of, calling out to you that are changing your life? What advice do you have for folks that are applying to college, what they should be looking for in that experience, or what they should be taking away, or how they can be better prepared for that experience over the first couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, this one was really hard for me too, because like I said, I was just so used to being a nerd and being a good student, and getting there my freshman year and not quite having the skills that I needed to succeed in the way that I wanted to succeed, especially as you compared them to some of the other students who might have gone to private school in Connecticut, or who might have gone to a better funded public school in, Georgia, wherever. And just kind of recognizing that gap. And I think the thing that I will always be grateful for is that I had professors who were very clear with me about what I could fix, how I could fix it, and worked with me to do so. And having that comparison now with larger universities like the University of Michigan, which is also my alma mater, it really is different. I was in classes with 12 other students. I think my largest lecture had 60 people in it for one science class. And that makes all the difference in terms of, student teacher ratio and the amount of time and attention you're getting, and the ability to really craft your skill.
Talk to me about the difference between, because I think you were talking about student teacher ratio, which just popping in my mind, student advocacy, right? Advocating for yourself, getting better at that. Talani Thomas's story, she just, the story of her, she was talking about things that she was doing, the way that she sort of stood up for herself earlier in her career, and being able to advocate for yourself, and coming from a historically Black college and from institutions like that I think sort of helps with that, being able to sort of stand your ground and call things, but also to talk about what you're talking about in terms of that student readiness and dealing with that change of size and institution.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there, right? Because on one hand, I recognize when students feel uncomfortable reaching out to, say, their professor or to a teacher assistant, because they might feel some shame around not being ready or not being as ready as they could be. And so for me, an HBCU experience almost maybe not 100%, but it decreases that level of hesitancy and shame because, you know, most of your professors are probably going to be Black. You know that no one's judging you as like the stupid Black girl in the class. So that barrier becomes less. That's first and foremost. The other thing is, I do think that there is an encouragement to voice your concerns and be a self-advocate and ask questions and push and push and push. And it served me very well afterwards because I am now able to sit in professional settings and say, yes, there's always things that I, Lishaun Francis, need to work on, but here's what I need from you. And holding other people accountable who are supposed to be there for your professional development and growth is something that I picked up on my very first year on campus.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that it's very easy to forget, you know, whether you're at A. Philip Randolph Campus High School or in college, the fact that you are the client in this relationship, right? Yes, there's somebody else grading you. Yes, you need to have these great relationships with these gatekeepers and power brokers in these settings. But at the end of the day, especially when it comes to the educational institution, you're the client, and you know it's your right to advocate for what you need. I know, you know, with my daughter, I've had to have the conversations with her about how to respectively but forcefully talk to her teachers in a way that, you know, demanded the best experience for her, you know.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I do think that depending on the school you go to, that's not encouraged. And that's not a skill that is encouraged or cultivated.
Right.
So I luckily did not have that experience. And, you know, there's so much of this is about the psychology and the psychology of power and who has the power in the relationship. And that is, you know, when you're thinking about HBCUs and institutions, you're talking about institutions that are very mindful of the power structures that exist for the, you know, that even require their existence. So I do think that there are some subtle things and not so subtle things that happen on campus and within the institutional walls to make sure that those power structures aren't necessarily reinforced.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'm particularly interested. I want to get through the Spelman experience. I want to know how, you know, the rest of it played out. I don't know if you did any other kind of studying abroad or anything during that experience. You did. All right. So I want to talk about that stuff because I also want to talk about, because I think this will lead into the conversation when you're at these other institutions to sort of point out some of those differences and things that people need to look to, because I think the toolbox that you're given from that institution is so powerful, and it's something that these interviews have really actually opened my eyes to, because I, you know, sort of follow what Charles Thompson's advice is. I was never, you know, classically trained as a guidance counselor, so, you know, I basically learned everything from Thompson. We talk about, you know, small liberal private art schools, and to a certain extent, you know, for majority of students, especially, you know, because not everybody can go to Spelman, right? So you know, some of those institutions are probably the right place for a lot of students, but, you know, for somebody that, you know, has the grades and the ability, I you know, after having these conversations with so many folks, I'm like, these are the places that you need to be, because, you know, especially in today's environment where, you know, and again, getting into, I want to talk to you about the University of Michigan, but you have these institutions there, all of the racism and inequity that exists all over the world, but especially in the United States, I think comes out in these institutions.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I'll wrap up my Spelman experience and just tell you that I did study abroad, and I think it was the best semester of my entire 4 years. So that might not be a little fair that I'm singing Spelman's praises, and my best semester was actually off campus in Cape Town, South Africa. It's something that I highly recommend. Every time I speak to high schoolers who ask about choosing colleges, and I say, if you can, choose one that has a study abroad program, because it is such an invaluable experience. I spent 6 months there. I did a semester at University of Cape Town. I met friends and people that I would have never met if I did not go there, who lived in America and we're still friends today. I met South African friends and had really good relationships there. And just being immersed in the culture is so much different than going to go visit for a week or two.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that to kind of backtrack on what you were saying, I think it's a pretty often truth that we experience that one experience often makes another experience better, right? So I don't think you're in any kind of muddy water at all talking about going from Spelman to South Africa, because I can't imagine if you hadn't gone to Spelman and then you're just at some kind of generic institution and you do a semester abroad. First of all, I think folks are looking towards a program with different eyes and with different values and just setting that all up. Like I can imagine the logistics being different. I don't know if you're following what I'm putting down there, but just that the whole experience would be incredibly different from the one that you probably had, and which made it probably the best experience. So you get back from, well, first of all, I know you said you met people out there, but what was the thing that made it the best experience of your 4 years?
A lot of it might just be because it was new, and maybe if I'd spent 4 years, there, the pall of newness would have begun to worn off.
Wouldn't have the same luster, yeah.
Yeah, that is definitely possible. I think what made it so great for me was that this was a completely new experience. And I got to have political debates and conversations I would never have here because they weren't in an international context. I got to read about, much more of the African academics and literature than I probably ever would hear. And it was just a really good learning experience. So from that perspective, and we talked earlier, like I'm a learner, right? That's one of the things that I love to do. I love to learn new things. I love to have new experiences. So for me, that's worth it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think traveling abroad is something that everybody needs to do a lot more of, especially across the United States. People need to see and experience other cultures. I think that's part of the challenges of the national conversation right now, is that people just aren't exposed, right? All right, so talk to us about, you get back, you're finishing up junior year and then senior year. So let's take us through the end of that and then talk to us about what the decision around was with continuing school.
Yeah, so I did everything out of necessity up at this point. So paint the picture for you. I am applying to schools in 2007. And I realized very quickly that I'm applying for jobs, and I realized very quickly that they did not pay very well for someone with just a bachelor's, particularly a bachelor's in sociology. So what I did was
What jobs were you looking for at that time?
What'd you say?
What jobs were you looking for at that time?
Mostly research jobs, so entry-level research jobs. I thought that would be where I would fit best. And they just did not pay that well. And so what I decided to do, and somebody actually recommended it to me, they said, well, if you ever think you want to pursue further education, why don't you apply for jobs and graduate school at the same time? And whatever works out best for you financially, that's what I did. And so it was just kind of really interesting. So I actually spent my senior year not just finishing up my senior year courses, I was also working, I had an internship, and I was applying for jobs, and I was applying for graduate school. It was a very crazy time. And my best next option was graduate school.
That's awesome. And so what was the financial sort of decision around that? I know that the jobs didn't pay well, but was graduate school paid for? Were you able to get a grant for the stuff?
Yeah, graduate school was paid for. So I was able to get graduate school funded, and that was part of the appeal. I was going to be learning something I wanted to learn, and we just established how much I'm a learner, and I was really interested in the field of public policy. B, they were paying for it. C, the jobs that I was being offered wouldn't even have paid for rent in any city that I knew of.
Right. Which is unfortunately typical, right? So
Right.
talk to me about the decision to, so at this point you're headed towards Michigan, right?
Yep,
So
Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Ann Arbor, Michigan. So talk to me about the transition from Georgia to Michigan. Obviously, I imagine there was trips back to New York, Roosevelt Island in the middle of all this. Talk to me about how all that was going and the conversation with family. And also, was Spelman completely paid for as well, or was
Spelman was not completely paid for. Spelman paid for about 60% of my education, so
okay.
I paid for the remaining 40.
All right, so we got some nice loans. So we got that kind of pressure in the world, to do well and pay those bills, right?
Exactly.
And that's part of the equation and math that you're putting together. So talk to us about that conversation that you're going from Spelman in Georgia to Michigan and the conversation with mom and dad and the family.
Wasn't a lot of conversation. I mean, I think we established that, I kind of did my own thing. I think my parents trusted me. They didn't really know a lot about what was happening. They wanted to know I was safe. They wanted to know I wasn't digging myself into a ton of debt. So I think they were excited that I was getting a free ride. And that was it. I mean, I will say that one thing that I am thankful for is that my parents have always been supportive and they've never discouraged me from doing anything. And I've largely made my own decisions on my educational and career path.
That's awesome. All right, so you've made the decision. You're you're in charge. So you go to Michigan. Tell us about the change in culture and lifestyle going from Georgia to Michigan and what that university life was like there.
Yeah, so a little different than being an undergraduate student. As a graduate student, I was again at a small school within a very large university. So one, completely overwhelmed by the sheer size of this campus. I mean, University of Michigan, I think undergrad is just 40,000 students. But the School of Public Policy only had about 200 students. So really small field, which is one of the reasons why I applied there to begin with. And I had a great time at Michigan. I had a really good experience. I learned a lot. I had some great connections. It was another culture shock because, when I was going from an all-Black college to a predominantly white school, so that in of itself was a culture shock, but I got a really good sense of what it would have been like to go to a predominantly white institution for 4 years. But still made really good friends, made really good connections. And for me, the biggest and worst part of going to Michigan was just how cold it was.
Yeah,
I was not prepared, Cameron.
For a while between Georgia and Cape Town, South Africa. These are nice warm spots.
I was not prepared, and I was very arrogant when I first moved there. I was just like, "Oh, I'm from New York."
You're from New York, yeah. Once you get some middle of the winter lake air.
The lake effect? Oh my God. I was in tears. I could not believe I had moved to this place. So my joke is always, the biggest problem at University of Michigan is that it's in the middle of Michigan. So
that's amazing. So talk to us about what the education was looking like. And so were you there in Michigan for 2 years?
2 years.
2 years. So talk to us about what that ended up looking like in terms of, classes, what work is looking like, because now, you're already in that situation. At the moment you begin school, you're probably already worrying about what the job is going to be very soon after. So talk to us about that.
It's deeper than that. You got to remember the Great Recession, right when I'm in grad school, right when I'm looking for work. As soon as graduate, I applied for work for my first real job in the middle of the last recession. It was a very scary time. But I will say that Michigan did such a good job with their career development and trying to make sure that we all got something. And not everyone got what they wanted, particularly in their fields, as soon as they finished. But many of us had jobs within a year of graduating Michigan. I graduated Michigan without a job, and I slept in my brother's living room in DC while I went on interviews, partied with my friends, and tried to figure out next steps. And I finally got a job, I think a couple of months after graduating.
What's your brother's name?
Rehan.
We got to shout out Rehan because that's big. That's nice. That's really nice that the brother came through with that. That's
He did. And I moved out of his place. I was very proud. I got my own studio, and I finally moved out. And when I was moving out, he said to me, "You know, you don't have to move, right? You can stay here and save money if you want to," which I thought was so sweet. But I was really tired of sleeping on the air mattress on the floor in the living room.
Permanent living room camping situation. That's awesome. So what was the first job?
The first job was with the Department of Education, just kind of
and we skipped over so much stuff, and I know it's probably like all a big blur, but I'm assuming there was like some internships along the way and different stuff that you were doing in college. So I don't know if you want to hit on now all that, but then talk to. And so say what the first job again was?
Department of Education. I was a fiscal and policy analyst there.
This is in DC, so you're working program analyst for the U.S. Department of Education. What was that like?
I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I mean, for all the hoopla around getting a good federal government job, I was bored out of my mind. But remember, it's also during the middle of the recession, and I did not have any other job, opportunities at the time. So I took it, and I suffered through it for almost 2 years until I could make my next move, and until the economy got better.
Now, talk to us, because I think this is something for folks that want to go into education, go into education policy. What was the challenge or the thing that made that job not pleasurable?
Too bureaucratic, too big. I think if you were truly looking to make a difference, it's hard to do so on the federal level in those kinds of roles. I think it's much easier to do so on the state and even easier to do so on the local level. So it's just one of those things where you are working for an agency that has upwards of 3,000 people, and you are not a decision maker, and you aren't invited to even hear the decision makers speak. And you really are just kind of pushing buttons and making sure that their ideas get through. But if you're really into policy development, if you're really into thinking through next steps and thinking through new programs, and you're young and inexperienced, I think the smaller the place, the bigger the opportunity you'll have.
I wonder, because I'm always a big change kind of thinker. I wonder if at that point, if you're really trying to get change, maybe you get something like that, you do some work on the local level, and then you try to get into politics, because then it's really, if you want to change education across the country, the only way to do it is on the legislative end.
Yeah, it's true. If you want to become a Congress person, most people I meet don't necessarily want to change education across the country. They want to do it in their communities or in their city, or on a statewide basis. A lot of people laugh when they think about my journey, because I went from federal government to state government. And people always talk about how most people go in the opposite direction. They start off local, then they go state, then they go federal. And I just had a very different experience. I just wasn't really excited about how big it all was on the federal level. And if you aren't high up, and what I mean by high up, I mean, if you aren't like a presidential appointee, it's very hard to have an impact.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I can see somebody getting frustrated on the very, very, very local level, because I've worked inside of a high school, right? So understand the challenges between, policy being handed down by city government or state government. I think so many school systems are dealing with the real great challenges of state government requirements under COVID and all of that stuff, like up close and personal every single day, waiting on state to give an update on a guideline or mandate so much more than usual. And that's got to be incredibly frustrating. So it also makes sense to me, to be in state government, right? So, if you want to make a difference in your state, to do that on a larger scale than, dealing with a policy that you're going to have a lot of difficulty changing, working within the school, You can do that on the state level. So I love.
This is why I do state advocacy, because this is to your point, Cameron. This is what it's all about. For me, this is where the money is. This is where the policies come down. Obviously, there are federal.
I love your perspective on that. So talk to us about the transition. Talk to us about the different jobs that you've been doing and what you're doing now.
Yeah, so what I'm doing now, I think I'm most proud of and I'm most excited about. But I work for an organization that essentially does research, policy, and advocacy work for kids. And what that means for me, for someone who has the mental health portfolio, is I advocate to our state elected officials, and our state administration on how they can do better for children's mental health.
And talk to me about, is this something that you studied in school? What's your passion? How did you get into particularly issues around mental health, developmental disabilities, and alcohol and drug programs?
So I kind of fell into it. School, I studied policy development and public policy, which is the crux of the work. And I always tell people that if you are interested in healthcare, you should do your master's in public health. If you're interested in policy development and public policy more broadly, you should do your master's in public policy. So what that means for me is I learned the skills to think through programs and practices regardless of issue area. So if you gave me enough time, I could think through tax policy. If you gave me enough time, I could think through ed policy. If you gave me enough time, I could think through healthcare policy. I fell into the healthcare world. When I first moved to California, I had wanted to do education policy at the LAO, my first job out here, but they didn't have any openings for education. They only had an opening for health. So I took it. Good news is it was right around the Affordable Care Act and rolling out the Affordable Care Act. So I learned a ton. And once you have healthcare knowledge, just like once you have education knowledge, it is very hard to pivot into another field because you become an expert, in that thing. And I was interested in it. I also think I appreciated it because I see the overlap between health and education, between health and housing, between the public health approach. I see how it really doesn't benefit communities, the fact that we continue to talk about education in a silo, we continue to talk about health in a silo. And we continue.
Agreed.
So that was kind of my journey, and I really enjoy what I'm doing now. But most of what I do now is really around thinking through and developing policies and ideas that either the state has handed down or that we want the state to implement, and its impact, particularly on Black and brown and poor kids in California, when it comes to their mental health, and then advocating for those changes.
So talk to us, imagine right now, more than ever, all of the issues that, existed before are magnified by the challenges brought on by this pandemic. So talk to me about what's going on right now and how people can help if they want to get involved in the advocacy for children and education, especially around mental trauma. I can't imagine, I feel for A. Philip Randolph's juniors and seniors right now. It's got to be very trying times trying to figure it out. I know we began our conversation today around anxiety, the anxiety that they must be feeling, trying to figure it all out. I know that obviously everybody should be out there and pushing hard, but also not feel like they need to have it all figured out. Talk to us about what's going on and what you're dealing with in this environment.
Yeah, I think the best way to put it is if you think about what was going on pre-COVID, which was Black and brown kids were disproportionately more concerned about finances and the stressors of finances, disproportionately more concerned about food insecurity, housing insecurity, and then you enter COVID which is a healthcare pandemic. And while young people might not necessarily be getting sick, the elders in their homes or the elders in their lives might be, and they might become caregivers, and the money might stop or the money might, slow down. So we are now adding to the stressors that were already there. We already had a mental health crisis, at least on the national level, before COVID. So really things are exacerbated now that people are staying home, nationwide shelter in place orders, and they don't really have those formal and informal connections to their peers or to supportive adults or things like that. So, I always tell folks that if you are working with kids or around kids, we really need to publicize the national suicide prevention number a little bit more. I think it should be, front and center in front of all of our faces, because in real time, people are struggling.
I agree. I'm going to bring up the website so you can keep on speaking on, to that, so we can showcase that right now and get that out there. What are some things that you're looking to the future here? And then I'll have you talk about that, and then we'll talk about people you want to connect with and who you'd like to connect with you.
Yeah, so I think for me professionally, I'm always interested in those organizations or, those elected officials statewide or even nationally who are interested in moving this work forward. From an alumni perspective, I love connecting with, current seniors to talk about their next steps, or even college students to talk about their next steps. Because I do remember this time and just being filled with anxiety and hope about, what to do next. And I want them to know that it's okay not to have everything figured out right now. And it's okay to take your time. And it's okay to switch jobs, and it's okay to get it wrong. So, that I think it would be my response for just, the alumni connections piece.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it's really amazing. I think people have been coming together. I'm so excited that people have got the opportunity to learn a little bit more about what you do. In terms of folks that you want to connect with, who are people that you really want to sort of see and meet in the world?
Just generally?
Yeah.
Just generally. Oh my. People, like famous people? What's the question here, Cameron?
So, I think that, one of the things that's really amazing about networking in general, right? Whether it's, getting together with your alum from Spelman or your alum from A. Philip Randolph Campus High School, it's really surprising, where people are in the world and who they're connected with. Wanza Lumumba brought in Anderson Paak, who's, a hip hop artist, for our gala recently. We're only a few degrees separated from anybody. So if there's a famous person you want to get in contact with, I would throw it out there, put it out in the universe, and it might come to you. But, are there folks in a particular industry, in a particular part of government that you're looking to get in contact with? Are there folks that are in a particular career path or field that you would really like to connect with you? I think that's, if you put it out there, it may come.
So you know what? Not necessarily. I do think though that I am always just kind of in search of community, and I've formed a really good community here in California. So if there are other Randolph alum or Spelman alum that I have not connected with out in California, that is always my ask. I'm much more concerned and much more interested in creating community for myself, because I do think, particularly as we're going through COVID, we all recognize how important that is.
That's amazing. All right, so you heard it here. If you're in California, particularly, you're in government, get in touch with Lishaun. Thank you so much for doing this with me. I have your LinkedIn down below on YouTube. You can go down to the comments. If you're on Facebook, you can go over to the side and you'll see her LinkedIn there. Connect with Lishaun and make some alumni connections happen. Thank you so much for Lishaun. I'm going to give you the final word. So talk to me about say goodbye to everybody, and I'm looking forward to connecting again.
Cameron, first of all, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk and just to describe my experience. I'm excited about all the work that SBI is doing. I love alumni connections and just keeping us close, because at the end of the day, I think we all realize that Randolph is home.
That's right. And what better way to get into the alumni connections thing? Thank you so much again.
Bye.
Let me see if I can make this work. Press my buttons here.
This is the Alumni Connections Project. We all know Randolph is better than the rest. Even when you regress, you still gotta rep. Villa, Randolph Campus High School. But this is not a test, you should say it with your chest. Be proud of your origin, and if you are proud, support it then. Stronger together through unity, better together. Let's build the community. Randolph isn't a school or a building, it's a legacy. It's not in your past, it's your identity. So show some pride. Alumni Connection, sponsored and brought to you by SBI, CCPI. Zapdowntownbusiness.org, zapdowntownbusiness.org. The journey doesn't end with graduation and prom. The journey doesn't end with graduation and prom. The journey doesn't end with the journey doesn't end. This is the Alumni Connections Project. This is the Alumni Connections Project. 8 Philip Randolph, Randolph, 8 Philip Randolph, 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 Randolph.